We are the family and the community that makes Walmart, Walmart. Whether it's stepping up in times of need or standing with our customers in times of calm and celebration, delivering on our promise to help them save money and live better every day. We are Walmart.
Good evening and welcome. God, is it great to be in downtown Austin, right? I'm Evan Smith, the co-founder and CEO of the Texas Tribune. We have been, as you may know, some of you have been with us at the festival before, the last 7 years on the University of Texas campus. Love those guys. Love being on that campus. But when I was walking around downtown this morning and saw all the Tribune Festival branding, all the badges, all the energy, I forgot what that was like. This is where we should be, in the shadow of the Capitol, on the streets of downtown Austin, in the venues of downtown Austin. And we are so happy to welcome you. So happy to welcome you to the 2018 Texas Tribune Festival. This is our 8th festival, and this event, which is the centerpiece of the events we do all year long all over the state, is the biggest festival we've ever done. There will be close to 7,000 people attending the festival this weekend. On behalf of everybody at the Texas Tribune, now 9 years in business producing nonpartisan journalism out of our nonprofit newsroom covering this wonderful state that we love so much, on behalf of all of my colleagues at the Tribune, thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy to have you here. We have a great weekend planned for you. Consistent with the mission of the Tribune, which is to inform and engage and educate people about the big issues that they face and their neighbors and friends face, we're going to have more than 90-hour-long conversations over the course of this weekend, 360 speakers. And the opening session of this festival, we'll bring out Secretary John Kerry in a second, is the best of all possible ways to kick the weekend off. So I want to, first of all, thank and acknowledge the presenting sponsor of the festival, back with us for the 4th straight year, Walmart. Walmart has embraced the mission of this event in supporting it every year as our sponsor. And really, Walmart, as our partner on this, in all sincerity, gave us the resources that allowed us to move from the University of Texas to downtown Austin. They are, through their support, helping to pay for serious journalism in Texas. So thanks to Walmart. I want to thank Autumn Rich and Company. They have produced this festival so perfectly. Everything so far has gone great. It looks like it's going to be an amazing production. Autumn and her team, Autumn, Michelle Aldridge, Claire Rui, David Nolan, everybody associated with the production of this event, we think it's going to go smoothly. You all are going to be able to get from place to place very easily, find your way, enjoy the weekend. So a big hand for Autumn Rich and Company, our production partners on this event. I also want to thank everybody at the Texas Tribune who has worked on this event, beginning with, but not limited to, Agnes Varnum, the festival's director, Jessica Weaver, the events team at the Tribune, Charlie Rezick, all of our multimedia people, everybody contributed. Truly, all hands are on this event, and so thanks to the Tribune folks. And let me now thank the other sponsors of this festival. If you have gotten your program book, you know that we have a ton of great sponsors who have supported this event, made it possible for us to do this amazing work. Very quickly, let me go through the list, and I want you to save your applause, and at the end, please acknowledge them. Laura and John Arnold, AARP, the Alabama Coushatta Tribe of Texas, Anheuser-Busch, the Annette Strauss Institute for Civic Life, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, Ascension Seton, AT&T, Austin Community College, the Barron and Adler Law Firm, Beer Alliance of Texas, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Boeing, BP, Bumble Biz, the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, Chariot, the Charles Koch Institute, Comcast, Deloitte, Educate Texas, Entergy, Equinor, Google, Greater Texas Water Company, Gulf States Toyota, the Hatton W. Sumners Foundation, HEB, Hill and Knowlton Strategies, Houston First, Houston Tillotson University, IBC Bank, JP Morgan, the LBJ School of Public Affairs, Lobby Days. Yes, we get it, you're awesome, that's great. I love the LBJ School. Lobby Days, the Lumina Foundation, LIFT, the Meadows Foundation, the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute, and the Hackett Center for Mental Health, Mazina Hoff Winery, Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas, the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation, Nature Conservancy, NRG Energy, Encore, Panacea Collection, Pearson, PepsiCo, Quest Diagnostics, Raise Your Hand Texas, Silicon Labs, Southwest Airlines, Spurs, Sports and Entertainment, hashtag Go Spurs. St. David's Foundation, St. David's Healthcare, Texas A&M University and the Texas A&M University System, Texas Association of Community Colleges, Texas Association of Realtors, Texas Bankers, Texas Central, Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities, Texas Cultural Trust, Texas Education Grantmakers, Texas X's, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, the Texas Secretary of State, the Barbara Jordan and Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs and the Political Science Department at Texas Southern, Texas State Technical College, the Texas Tech University System, Tito's Handmade Vodka. Naturally, the biggest applause for Tito's. Toyota North America, Uber, the University of Texas at Austin, UT Press, Upbring, UT Southwestern Medical Center, Valero, the Walton Family Foundation, and the Zachary Group. Give them all a big hand. Why do we have serious journalism paid for every year in Texas? It's in part because we have wonderful corporate partners who make it possible for us to do accountability journalism, which is great, and we appreciate them. Our festival media partners, the lead festival media partner this year is NBC and MSNBC, and you will see them on Congress Avenue on Saturday. We're so happy to welcome NBC News and MSNBC to the festival, along with the Austin American Statesman, the Austin Black Business Journal, the Austin Chronicle, Community Impact, Culture Map, Gatehouse Media, Houston Public Media, the Killeen Daily Herald, KLBJ, KLRU, KXAN, The Monitor, Outsmart Magazine, The Rivard Report, Slate, Texas Monthly, Texas Standard, Think from KERA, Time Magazine, Univision Austin, Voice of Asia, and The Washington Post. A big hand for those guys over there. A special thanks again to our presenting sponsor of tonight's opening session, PepsiCo. Let me say a word about membership. You saw a slide a moment ago that talked about becoming a member in the Texas Tribune, of the Texas Tribune. I want to thank those of you in the room who are Texas Tribune members. We thank corporate sponsors, major donors, foundations. Members make the magic happen at the Texas Tribune. All of you who support us with your time and talent and treasure as members in one form or another make it possible for us to do this amazing work. And we could not be happier to have you as part of our community. In fact, I want to take a moment and show one lucky member a token of appreciation. Now, where are members? They're in the reserve section up front. Members, put your hand up if you're a member of the Texas Tribune. One of you was handed a card randomly on the way in. Who got the card? Put your hand up. This gentleman here got the card. Thank you so much for your support. Courtesy of one of our sponsors and supporters, Silicon Labs, you'll be leaving tonight with a new Amazon Echo show. Thank you for your membership. We have really turned this into a game show, haven't we? That's okay. One last game show bit. If you're not a member, there's a lot more to be had where that came from. If you want to get in on the action, including a chance to win a getaway weekend to Marfa, with accommodations at El Cosmico and dinner for two at Cochineal, anytime over this weekend, text Tribune to 444-999. Text Tribune to 444-999. You join now, you get entered into a drawing, or stop by our membership booth at 800 Congress before midnight on Saturday. We'd love to have you as a member. So Secretary Kerry and I are going to do about 50 minutes on stage together of conversation. The balance of time will be your questions. We're not going to have microphones in the aisle. We did this last year. We're doing it again. We are going to collect your questions along the way. To submit your questions for Secretary Kerry, rather than lining up at a microphone, we're going to ask you to either tweet a question at us using the hashtag AskTrib. Hashtag AskTrib. Or text the word AskTrib, and we'll have instructions up on the board. You don't have to write this down, to 512-692-0689. When it comes time to ask questions, that number will come up. You can text a question. My wonderful colleague, Alex Samuels, our community reporter, will read your questions from the stage, and we'll get into a conversation with Secretary Kerry that brings you all into the conversation. Please remember to silence your phones. Please, for everybody in the room. If you're tweeting about this, hashtag is TribFest18. All right? The hashtag for this is hashtag TribFest18. Hashtag TribFest18. Okay, ready to go? All right. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the opening session of the 2018 Texas Tribune Festival, the energizing kickoff to our amazing weekend. Though it seems like a million news cycles ago, Senator Al Franken of Minnesota was in this spot last year, cracking jokes, talking smack, and laying out in detail an agenda for the Democratic Party and for our country on health care and other issues. The year before, 2016, early enough in the sprint to Election Day that a Trump victory was still fan fiction, Governor John Kasich of Ohio talked about the state of the Republican Party and the way forward for conservatism and called for a return to civility and the selfless pursuit of a greater good. Both of those conversations were inward-looking, concerned mostly with a litany of domestic policy challenges and the increasingly fragmented party politics at the center of our broken system. This year, with the world literally on edge, we're consciously turning our gaze outward to the global stage, to the conflicts and the characters and the collection of acronyms in the daily headlines. NATO, ISIS, NAFTA, the EU, Russia and Putin, North Korea and Kim, Iran, Syria, China, Mexico. When even Canada is on your list of bad actors, there's a desperate need for clarity, perspective, context, insight, and institutional memory. That brings me to John Kerry. We are so happy and fortunate to welcome the former U.S. Secretary of State and U.S. Senator from Massachusetts to Austin to talk about the complicated state of the world. It's a subject he knows well, one that figures prominently in his memoir, Every Day is Extra, which has just been published but is already a New York Times bestseller. Few people in the modern era of politics or of government have been at the center of more debates, respectful and heated, over the precise set of issues in play today. But there's more than the state of the world to talk about with Secretary Kerry. There's the state of the presidency under Donald Trump. There's the state of Congress and its relationship to the executive branch. There's the state of the Democratic Party, whose presidential nomination he won 12 years ago. You better believe I intend to ask him about that race, in which he faced off against a candidate and a campaign staff familiar to so many of us in this state capitol, a race in which his candidacy was maligned by outside groups based largely here in Texas, a race whose tight finish put him much closer to the White House, lest we forget, than Hillary Clinton got in 2016. Even after all this time, the mere mention of Secretary Kerry's name evokes strong feelings. No one doesn't have an opinion about him. But whatever you think of him, there's no denying his place in history. Only 70 men and women have served as U.S. Secretary of State, the nation's top diplomat. Fewer than that number have been a major party nominee for president, the highest office in the land. And fewer than 10 in history have been both Secretary of State and major party nominee for president, a list that includes Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe. Pretty good company to be in. Secretary Kerry was born in Colorado, educated at boarding schools in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, graduated from Yale University with a degree in political science, and immediately enlisted in the Naval Reserves. After completing officer candidate school, he shipped off for Vietnam. During a 4-month tour commanding swift boat missions, he and his crew engaged the enemy multiple times in multiple locations, and he sustained multiple injuries that resulted in the awarding of medals: 3 Purple Hearts, the Silver Star, and the Bronze Star, recognizing heroic achievement. Upon his return to the States, he found common purpose with the Vietnam veterans against the war, testifying before the Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs, a committee he would one day chair, as an icon of the anti-war movement. After finishing law school at Boston College and serving as an assistant DA in Middlesex County, he ran successfully for Massachusetts Lieutenant Governor, serving under Michael Dukakis. In 1984, he ran for and won a U.S. Senate seat and was reelected 4 times. In 2004, as we said, he ran for and won the Democratic Party's presidential nomination and saw his military service questioned on the way to losing the general election to the incumbent Republican George W. Bush. In early 2013, he resigned his Senate seat to become Barack Obama's second Secretary of State, and he remained in that job through the end of the second Obama term. It's exciting to have him here, isn't it? Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our opening keynote tonight, a conversation with Secretary John Kerry.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it.
How are you? Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, welcome to Austin.
I like the company you put me in. Thomas Jefferson,
James Monroe. Right. Not bad, right? Mr. Secretary, I want to begin by talking about your book.
Yeah, let's hold it up.
This is the book, Every Day is Extra. It is out a couple weeks, and as I said, it's a bestseller. I was curious reading it because I thought I knew your story already. I felt and feel like you've been a character in my life at some point or another for 30 years. And I feel like we know your story already, and I wonder why you felt the need to commit it to paper in the detail that you did.
Because I thought it was important to tell the truth.
To tell the truth. Has the truth not been told about you, Mr. Secretary?
No. You know, I think it's inevitable. I've been in public life since I came back from Vietnam and protested the war. And it's inevitable. First, let me just stop for a minute and say thank you all for being here. It's wonderful to be here at the Trib Fest.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I love Austin. Great to be back in Austin. I've been here many times. This is the first time I've really written about big events that made a difference. First time I've written publicly about Vietnam. I've talked about it. Obviously, I gave the testimony. But I've never written from start to finish about that period of time. This book is not a policy book, folks. This book is a journey. It's an American journey, which I happen to believe is particularly relevant at this moment in time when our country is in trouble and when our democracy is threatened and when we need to understand why there are reasons to be optimistic and how we can, in fact, change things for the better.
Yep.
And I think the journey, I started, when I was a freshman in college, Evan, we almost went to war with the Soviet Union over Cuba. When I was a sophomore, I was sitting, come off, I'd been substituted in the Harvard-Yale soccer game, and I was sitting on the bench, and a ripple went through the crowd, the president's been shot. And within 20 minutes, that turned into the president's dead. That was sophomore year. Junior year, the dogs were set on people at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and there was this incredible churning already about civil rights. And I took a trip down south from university and saw for the first time in my life signs that said, no colored, white only. And it was so jarring and so difficult to comprehend back in 1964 and 5. And then, 65, 66, Tonkin Gulf, Lyndon Johnson wants 500,000 troops. And we all confronted choices about our future. And some people had to make a decision whether to go to Canada. Others made a decision about jail. Others made a decision about going in the service or going on to school to avoid. And others got 5 deferments for bone spurs. Go figure.
Yeah. Mr. Secretary, the thing about democracy being challenged, you actually call out specifically in those very words in this book. I read this entire book thinking, why has he written this book? And then I get to the end and you say, why did I write this book? Literally, those words, why did I write this book? And the answer is, our democracy is challenged. That's what you wrote. This week, President Obama gave an interview to one of the Crooked Media podcasts in which he said a version of the same thing. The structure of our democracy is not working. I believe that our country, I think a lot of us in this room believe that our country can withstand anything, can survive anything, and that our democracy is strong enough, whether you like the person in the White House or not, whether you like the way Congress is composed or not, whatever you're feeling, that's temporary. This country is permanent. The democracy is permanent. It's a little jarring to hear you say and hear the president say that structurally, endemically, all of a sudden,
well, let me tell you what. Let me share, if I can, with everybody, and I don't want you to try and not be partisan here, but it's hard. Let me just share with everybody. I'm a huge believer. I believe in our country. I love our country. I volunteered to go into the service back in '65 because I believe in the adage that if much is given to you, much is expected from you. And I think that we sort of grew up with that. My parents were greatest generation parents. My dad was one of the early volunteers for the Army Air Corps. He was a cadet right out law school and went into the service. And my mother, who was born in Paris, was American from Boston, but happened to be born in Paris, learned how to be a nurse very quickly as the war came on, and she was working in Montparnasse Station in Paris, taking care of the wounded refugees and others, and then she heard the Germans are coming in tomorrow. And she literally got on a bicycle with her sister and her sister's new husband, a painter, a French painter, and they foraged their way across France to Portugal, where she got a boat and came to America and married my father. So I've had war and the impact of war in my veins for a fairly long period of time. And that sense of service was important. And back in '65, the first draft guards were not being burned. We haven't really mobilized the way it began to in '67, '68. So long story short, I look at our country today. I mean, I approach this, that patriotism can come from many different places.
Yep.
It's not a blind affection that allows you to look over the imperfections of your country. It's a sense of responsibility about what really makes America what we are and who we are. What are the values that have guided us?
Well, the argument, Mr. Secretary, is that by acknowledging the imperfections of our system or our country, that we're being more patriotic and not less, right? And that's the debate we're having right now. I mean, the fact is, the whole take a knee discussion is in some ways tied to this idea that there is only one version of patriotism or only one version of faith to the flag or faith to the country that is acceptable at any time.
That's always been a battle. And look at the history of a lot of countries that have had trouble holding on to their democracy or moving to democracy, and you will find demagogues who exploit for the cheap seats, for the lowest common denominator of American politics. They'll exploit that for power. And we have seen some of that. I think that it doesn't take our nation where we need to go. And I heard you in the introduction talking about sort of the external picture and internal picture. We have to do both right now.
Right.
We have no latitude anymore.
Yeah.
And I will tell all of you here politely and as kindly as I can, with as much invitation to be involved as possible, that there is a way forward. It's very clear. It's the only way, I think, that goes forward. Now, I want you to stop and think about it. We have tried, through history, I mean, go back, way back in history, and you know, from the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, to the Age of Reason, the Age of Enlightenment, the Renaissance, run through it all. It's been a progression of human beings developing their values and their understanding, Thomas Paine and rights of man and all of these things. So we got to where we are. It took us 2 constitutions and a lot of work. And it's still taking us a Supreme Court that interprets who we are and where we're going. You have to think about that. But, here's the but. We've tried every form of government that there is, I think, that men and women can conceive. Think about it. I mean, we've had monarchies, despotic and benevolent. We've had dictators, despotic and benevolent. We've had communism, socialism, constitutional monarchy, parliament, parliamentary democracy, parliamentary constitution. You name it, we've had it. And as Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government in the world, except for everything else.
Right. So you got to have faith.
So then you have to stop and say, okay, what's the matter with us? Well, what's the matter with us is what happened in 2016 is completely understandable. We all ought to be. I think most of you, if I asked you, are you angry about what's going on? You better believe you're angry. We're all angry because Washington is completely dysfunctional. I don't know how many of you watched today. That was sad. That was really sad. How you can possibly have a vote on a lifetime appointment for the Supreme Court of the United States when someone has said, there was a person in the room with me when this terrible thing happened, and they don't even talk to him and call him to be a witness. That's a disgrace. It's wrong.
Right.
It's just wrong.
So,
and everybody sees that the fix is in. The fix is probably going to be in on this. But people know the fix is in on taxes. The fix is in on health care. The fix is in on jobs. And so as you look at what's happened to America, here's the big problem. There is far, far too much money in American politics, and it's distorting the system. That's number one. Number two, very simple. We cannot even have a legitimate democratic general election in the United States because of gerrymandering. The fix is in. So, you know, I can run down, I can go down a list of 3 or 4 other things that we can't agree on what the facts are, Eben.
Right. There's no commonly
could.
agreed upon set
But you know how we do it?
How?
You do it. We do it. And I'm not kidding you when I say this. My book traces this journey, which for me began in those events that I just described to you, but more so began when I went to Vietnam and saw what we were doing. And I understood right away we weren't being told the truth about this war. And I didn't realize until years later when I read Bright Shining Lie by Neil Sheehan, probably the best book written on it. If you haven't read it, you should read it. It made me angry 15, 20 years later whenever it came out, because I didn't realize how early the lying began and how long it went on and how systemic it was. So it made me even angrier. But when I came back from Vietnam, the first thing I did was not protest the war. I got arrested later on, those of us who took that position. But I became involved in a thing called Earth Day, 1970. And we organized America to come out of their homes, everybody who cared about the environment, so that we wouldn't live next to a toxic waste site. We wouldn't have to have the Woburn dump give you cancer. We wouldn't have to have cities where you couldn't see from one end of the city to the other, et cetera. So what did we do? 20 million Americans came out of their home April 22nd, 1970. Monumental event in America. But we didn't stop there. We knew we had to translate the issues we cared about into voting issues. So we did. We targeted the 12 worst environment votes in the United States Congress. We labeled them the Dirty Dozen. We went after them in the election, and 7 of the 12 lost their seats.
Right.
You know what happened? All of a sudden, there's nothing like losing an election to stiffen the spine of the survivors, folks.
Right.
And that's what happened. So the survivors passed the Clean Air Act, safe drinking water, marine mammal protection, coastal zone management, and we got Richard Nixon to sign the Environmental Protection Agency into law. All of that happened. And then the peace movement, then we elected the Watergate Congress. So here's the deal, folks. I'll give you a magic number, then I'll shut up. 54.2. That's the percentage of eligible Americans that came out to vote in 2016 for President of the United States. When Barack Obama won in 2008, it was 62.3%. When he won re-election, it was 58. When I ran with George W. in 2004, it was 60.3 that came out. Get the difference? 54.2. I have been privileged to be an election observer, and I was deeply involved in helping to kick Marcos out of the Philippines and get Cory Aquino in. I was there as an observer for elections. I've been in the West Bank for elections. I've been in Sudan for elections, Kenya for elections. And I've walked up to people who are waiting in a long line in the hot sun all day long at risk of life. And I apologized to them for having to wait so long in the line. And you know what they said to me in English? They said, Mr. Secretary, you don't have anything to apologize for. I've waited 50 years to vote.
Right.
I'll wait another day, 2, 10, whatever it takes. We've got to feel that way in the United States of America again.
Right.
Restore our sense of responsibility.
But you know, I would actually, Mr. Secretary, I would flip it around. The relevant number is not 54%. The relevant number is 46%, right? So the relevant number are all the people who are eligible to vote and don't vote. We're in the state tonight that has the worst voter turnout over the last 4 elections in the entire country. And the reality...
you guys have, there's a midterm election in something like 40 days. Right. It's the best opportunity we've had in years to have a mid-course correction. And there's a guy whose name begins with B. And
who is... All you're doing is inciting them if you mention him, so don't mention him by name. Mr. Secretary, the problem... everybody
inciting or exciting?
I think inciting for the person. Everybody talks about how nobody votes, but nobody really has a solution. And honestly, we know that the percentage of Hispanic Texans who vote is disproportionately low compared to the population size. We know that young Texans don't vote in nearly the numbers that they should. Tell us how we... Don't talk about problems. Give us a solution. Well, how do you get people to vote?
Here's a solution. And
right.
I'm trying to get the message to people all across the country, as others are doing, not alone in this. You have to organize. It's hard work. Every big movement in this nation that made a difference in the 1960s, 70s, and we made a difference. Yes, there were a lot of excesses. We won't talk about all of those. But you know, it was a time of believing in the power of an individual to make a difference and going out and doing it. And President Kennedy inspired us, and Robert Kennedy inspired us, Martin Luther King inspired us. And every one of the accomplishments that people made in that period of time came about because people took time off from college to take a semester and go work. People worked in the summer. People, even while they were in college, went to work. Young people drove the change of that period. So we had the peace movement, the environment movement. It was young people. It was called the Peanut Butter and Jelly Brigade. And they went up to New Hampshire and knocked on doors and slept 20 to an apartment. And they worked their asses off so that Gene McCarthy won enough votes to send a message to Lyndon Johnson, you can't run again. And that message came through. That's how the war eventually, late for a lot of us, and we lost a lot of lives from the time Richard Nixon was elected with a secret plan for peace in 1968 until we got out in 1973 with a peace agreement. Half the people on the wall of the Vietnam Wall in Washington died during that period. That's when I was there, 1968, 1969. And the one promise Nixon kept was that it was still a secret 5 years later. So we finally broke through, but the difference made, my friend, was activism. You can work in a campaign, call a campaign. How do you get people out to vote? What do we need to do is the registration still open? Can we help go register people? Can we raise money locally, do a street party, block party, whatever? Get it into the campaign, because you've got to be able to fight back against the big money I talked about earlier. You've got to organize people so street by street you pull people out to vote. You know who's on the street, who's prepared to vote, and you go to that house. Well, I mean, we've reduced this to pretty much a science now.
It's that simple, but it's that complicated. It's that complicated, but that's simple.
Right, it's that complicated, but that simple. And, you know, it's their greatest fear. That is why there's only one party in the United States of America that actively works to prevent people from being able to vote. That's another thing we have to change in America.
You believe, Mr. Secretary, you believe that there is, I mean, we have discussions all the time here in Texas where we have this low voter turnout about whether the problem is people not voting or the problem is that we talk about wanting to motivate civic participation, but then do everything we possibly can to not motivate it. Whether it's not having motor voter, not having online voter registration, not having same-day registration. There are a lot of things we could conceivably do, right, to gin up participation.
From my own experience in Ohio back in 2004, let me just say, I lost the presidency by one state, Ohio. And by about, if X number of votes had changed the other way.
Well, it went very late into, I mean, I remember reading in the book
Well, it went into Wednesday afternoon, and I had to make a decision. Do I do what Al Gore did, and do we sue, do we not?
It was close enough that Bob Shrum, who worked for your campaign, actually said to you on election night, may I be the first to call you Mr. President. I don't know that anybody said that to Secretary Clinton on the night of 2016.
May I say, I had the wisdom and instinct to say, no, you can't.
Right. But it was close enough that there were people in your campaign who legitimately thought that night. We forget how close that election was.
No, I was president for 5 hours. It was great.
The Kerry administration.
It was one of the best administrations in history. We didn't F anything up.
Right. Mr. Secretary, I want to go back to the service to this country that you and others gave during the war in Vietnam. And really the larger question of what military service does to prepare you for service in politics and public service outside. You just were one of the people in Washington who buried John McCain. And we've spent a lot of time, relatively speaking, talking about the McCain legacy. Then we moved on to whatever the next thing was afterwards. So it looked like it might be a dogleg for a while. Turned out really not to be, more than just an immediate thing. You and John McCain forged an unlikely friendship. You talk about John McCain quite a bit in the book. One thing I didn't know, whole chapter. One thing I didn't know is you actually entertained John McCain as your running mate in 2004.
I did.
Right.
And we talked about it.
Which is an extraordinary.
We had secret talks about it.
Yeah.
Let me share with everybody, if I may share with you a little piece out of this book. First of all, I loved the Navy. Didn't like the war, I loved the Navy. And I loved my service because it taught me so much about leadership, responsibility, hierarchy, corporate structure in a sense, management of other human beings in stress situations, in unstressed situations, how to set goals, expectations. It's really a great, great training. And I think it's one of the reasons why we're so blessed right now that in candidacies all across America, there's so many veterans running in both parties.
The most since
and
World
so
War
many
II,
women
right?
veterans running.
But I think that's, you made a good point. So this election cycle, we have the most candidates in both parties, which is notable because there haven't been a ton of veterans who've run as Democrats of late. But in this cycle, the most veterans running at any time since after World War II, right?
And there's truly a virtue to it. I mean, when I came into the Senate, we had giants like Danny Inouye and Ted Stevens and others.
Bob Dole.
Bob Dole.
Right.
One of the saddest moments I ever saw about the transition of the new Senate, and I write about it in the book. Bob Dole, one of his great accomplishments legislatively, you all know he was grievously wounded in Italy during World War II. He could barely hold anything in his hand. Spent almost a year or more in a hospital recovering. And he was majority leader of the Senate, leader of the Republican Party, nominee of their party. And he passed the Americans with Disabilities Act with Tom Harkin, which opens up life to people physically challenged. And so George Herbert Walker Bush, God bless him, who I think is a great American and extraordinarily better president than a lot of people knew at the time. He initiated negotiations to create a treaty globally where we would require other countries to raise their treatment of veterans to the level of the United States. So we were the gold standard. And the treaty, all the countries that signed up to it said, yes, by X year, we're going to be living by a standard where someone in a wheelchair can punch the elevator button and somebody can access a public facility because there's going to be a ramp and so on and so forth. Guess what, folks? We had a Senate that had so transitioned. This was in 2009, so transitioned. It was just before I left to become secretary. It's 2012. And we had people arguing, you can't give up American sovereignty, no treaties, it's UN, world government. You know who those folks are. Some of them live close to you. And they, so as I am sitting here tonight, Bob Dole was wheeled into the floor of the United States Senate with the privileges of a former senator. And he and Liddy Dole were there on the floor of the Senate looking for their fellow Republicans to vote to raise the standard so American veterans who were wounded in Iraq or Afghanistan or anywhere could travel in another country and be able to travel freely. And the United States Senate, Republicans would not let us get the 67 votes to be able to do it. That's what we've come to, folks. That's where we are. And we have to break out of it. I can tell you, from the Senate I became part of in 1984 when I won, when Ronald Reagan carried Massachusetts, by the way. We had a Senate where you could still be collegiate, and John and I are the story of that to a degree.
Right.
But it began to change in 1994 when you had the Gingrich Revolution, and after the Gingrich Revolution you had the Tea Party, and after the Tea Party you had the Freedom Caucus. And what happened is they all promised lower taxes, less government, get rid of regulation, get the government out of your hair. We're going to reduce environmental protection so that we can go develop and do things. And we're going to get rid of Roe v. Wade. That sort of agenda was the litmus test agenda year after year. Well, guess what? Nobody did. The Gingrich Revolution didn't do it, and thank God in certain respects. The Tea Party didn't do it, the Freedom Caucus didn't do it. So along came Donald Trump, who basically carried out a hostile takeover of what remained of the Republican Party because everybody was so angry. The base didn't feel it was delivering. On our side of the fence, you could just see it out there in terms of what was happening in our primary. And so there's an anger out there. Well, John McCain and I came together. I want to tell you the story. From a very different place. John, obviously, 5.5 years in a Vietnam prison camp in Hanoi. Me, from the Mekong Delta and the war in the rivers to war protester. I get elected. I come to the Senate 2 years before John. John comes in. And we didn't trust each other. We didn't really know each other. We didn't really talk very much. We were thrown together one night in an airplane, U.S. Air Force plane, leaving from Andrews to go to Kuwait, right after the end of liberation of Kuwait. And John and I were facing each other. We were seated by seniority. So there I am flying forwards, he's flying backwards, we're talking. We look at each other, and we began a conversation. And I said, John, you know, I'd love to know more about Annapolis and what you went through with your father or grandfather and the weight of it and everything. So we had a wonderful personal conversation. At the end of it, folks, it turned out to be the single most important conversation that I had at one moment with one senator in my entire career. Because John and I agreed that the divisions of the war were hurting our country, and that no matter what position you took, people approached it as patriots, as what they thought was best for the nation. And we respected each other for that. But we decided, each of us, that we had a mission, that we needed to make peace with Vietnam itself, to put the war behind us so that Vietnam wasn't thought of as a war anymore, it was thought of as a country with strategic interest. And we needed to make peace here at home in the United States. So John and I set out to do that. We had the POW MIA committee. We worked, I went to Vietnam maybe 25 times, working with the government, with the president, the party secretary, sitting weirdly under these huge statues of Ho Chi Minh in the middle of Hanoi, which we never even dreamt we'd go to when we were in Vietnam. And we pieced together a slow process of proving that there weren't any POWs left alive in Vietnam. We put together the single most exhaustive, far-reaching effort to find bodies or remains or records about anybody listed as unaccounted for, missing, or POW. And in the end, over 700 American families, because of this effort, have had closure, bringing remains home, being able to bury their loved one, and being able to know what happened to their loved one. And today, as you sit here tonight, we have American soldiers on the ground in Vietnam continuing to dig, continuing to search, continuing to find answers.
And that happened because the two of you came together.
And John and I, literally, I stood in the very cell. I mean, it was very moving. And John and I talked about it. I went out to visit him in Arizona about 6 weeks before he passed away. And we were both proud of it, and we talked about it, because we came from such an improbable place. But we stood in his cell in Hanoi, just the two of us, talking about what we were trying to do and what an amazing journey we'd had. And the bottom line, folks, if John McCain and John Kerry, coming from here, could find common ground in a jail cell that one of us, McCain, had spent 5.5 years in Hanoi, that's a message. We can find common ground on anything in this country if we put our minds to it.
So let
we
me
can do it.
Let me ask you about a few issues that come up in the book related to your tenure as Secretary of State, but because these issues have long tails, all of them do, we're still talking about these big issues now. Principally, I want to ask you about the Iran deal, the Iran issue, which is a live issue now, one for which you have been attacked of late by people in the administration, by our own Senator Ted Cruz. This is about the question of whether you have been in communication with officials of the country of Iran alongside or outside the traditional parameters of our government. Senator Cruz said a few weeks ago, it's shameful to see John Kerry running around trafficking with Iranian dictators and enemies of America and to be actively colluding with the government of Iran to evade U.S. sanctions. President Trump talked about illegal meetings you had with the hostile regime of Iran that would undercut the work to the detriment of the American people. Secretary Pompeo, your successor, said that it was beyond inappropriate for you to be involved. Do you have anything to apologize for in your conversations with Iran?
What was profoundly inappropriate was lying about what I was doing and using the podium of the State Department to attack an ex-secretary because of it. Because let me be very clear. Let me be very, very clear here.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a problem. You know, I mean, when this president says something like that, illegal and this or that, does he have any credibility? I mean, this is a president who thinks the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth are three different things. I mean, you know,
Well, tell us what you, if they're not telling the truth, tell us what you actually did do and didn't do.
This is a president who called himself a stable genius the other day, which means Mueller has him on 2 counts of perjury just to start with, right there. I mean, seriously, think about this.
Mr. Secretary, tell us what you did do and did not do in Iran so we can clear this up.
I'll tell you exactly what I did. I want the record to be crystal clear.
Yeah.
I went to 3 international conferences, which everybody went to. The Munich Security Conference, John McCain was there, Lindsey Graham, a whole bunch of them. They didn't meet, but I did meet with Zarif at the Munich Security Conference. I met with him in Oslo, Norway at an international peace conference where everybody met with him. It's trying to find out what the road to peace is. And I met with him in the UN General Assembly week in New York, in which the New York Times editorial board met with him, the Washington Post, the senators, sitting senators met with him. It is the normal currency of American diplomacy and process that American citizens have the right to talk to people, to find out, to be educated. Now, I didn't negotiate anything because I'm not allowed to negotiate. I'm not negotiating. That's what Logan Act is about negotiating. Right. And obviously I'm not negotiating. But
did you tell them to wait out the Trump administration?
But let me just finish. No, but no, nobody has to tell them that. They're all doing it on their own. But the point I want to make to everybody here, because it is important, I want the facts to be known. All of those meetings, the 3 I just described, took place before President Trump had decided to pull out of the agreement. So I was trying to educate myself. And once I was educated, I had a long conversation with none other than Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on the telephone, talking at quite some length about how I saw the Iran thing, why I thought they should stay in it, what they would gain by doing it. Now, they didn't do that. They went out, and from the moment they've gone out, I've had 0 conversations with anybody in Iran. So for this administration, which actually was engaged in interfering with the Obama administration after the election before they were sworn in, relative to Palestine-Israel, where Jared Kushner and the president and others were all engaged in trying to stop the administration from doing what it was doing. They weren't even sworn in. They need to be careful what kind of accusations they throw around, particularly the Senate, where 40 United States senators wrote a letter to the Iranian president while we were negotiating, telling the Iranian leader, don't believe the people you're negotiating with because they can't cut a deal. Right. So you want to talk about interference. What's happened is we've lost a baseline of civility. We've lost truth. And our democracy any democracy requires truth in order to be able to determine decisions and choices that you want to make.
Let me ask you about Russia and Putin. 2 things. In the book, you talk about Putin. You describe Putin as a paradox. I actually expected you to come down hard on Putin and on Russia, given the environment in which we're in, and given the fact that Putin has been a bad actor pretty consistently.
Well, I do.
Over
I'm
time.
Pretty clear.
Well, but you also describe him in a more nuanced way, which I think is really interesting. You don't have entirely unkind things to say about Putin.
Well, I think accusing him of violating international law when he goes into Crimea and into East Ukraine and talking about how we put the sanctions in place and kept him from going to Kiev and how we took him on the subject of interference in our election was pretty clear accusation. And all you have to do is look at my comments in the United Nations Security Council when I went after Russia tongue and tooth, and nail about their lies, which I called them overtly, for what they were doing in Syria. And the phoniness of their claims about
So there is no nuance about Putin.
I don't think there's any nuance, but I do think this. What I tried to point out is, in diplomacy, you can't do the job if you don't have an ability to diagnose the challenges you have and to compartmentalize to some degree. Even as we were putting the toughest sanctions in place relative to their actions in Crimea and Ukraine, we were working with them to get the Iran nuclear agreement. We were working with them on the Paris Agreement. We were working with them on Syria. In fact, Sergei Lavrov co-chaired with me the International Syria Support Group which passed a resolution in the UN Security Council, 15-0, that laid out the full parameters of how you solve the Syrian struggle. The problem is Assad remained a spoiler, and Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, ISIS remained spoilers. They were outside of our discussion and ability. So controlling them for a ceasefire or keeping Assad from breaking a ceasefire was very difficult, which is why I argued to President Obama. We had a difference on this. I argued that we, the United States of America, needed to hold Assad accountable. If there was a ceasefire, we had to be willing to shoot his planes out of the sky or hold him accountable so we could change the calculation that he and the Russians had in order to get the political outcome. I didn't win that battle in the administration, but everybody knows I argued it. And I think we might have had a better shot. I write about this in the book. I call it the open wound, because to me, it's an international failure. It's a grotesque failure of the UN, of the international order, of all the major power countries, that we have not been able to leverage an end to the killing in Syria.
In Syria.
And,
the other thing, Mr. Secretary, on Russia, though, I want to ask you, you alluded to it earlier about Russia meddling in the elections. There has been this sort of 180, you know, as we've discussed whether or not our elections were tampered with. There seems to be general agreement that they were in some fashion in the last election. People have come back and said, why didn't the Obama administration do more? Shouldn't the Obama administration have done more? Spoken up more loudly during the election? If we knew this was going on, why didn't you all call it out?
Well, we did.
More aggressively.
Well,
well, you know the criticism. You know this.
I know the criticism. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you know about in public life, but you don't have to agree with it or believe it's real. And this is one of them. We did not know to full measure what was happening until the late spring of 2016. I don't think I came into any White House discussion on it until sometime in June or July. I can't remember precisely. But I know that it was about August when we were going to the G20 in China that we saw it rising to a level where we said, we've got to now step out. We've got to get this out to the American people. So most people in America don't know this, but President Obama went to Mitch McConnell in the Senate and said, look, here's what's happening. We need to, all of us, go out together so it's depoliticized and make it clear to the American people. And they said no. They wouldn't go out. And Donald Trump, if you all recall, at that period of time, folks, was already laying the groundwork for the illegitimacy of the election. He thought he was going to lose. He was calling it rigged everywhere he went. The system is rigged. And I guarantee you, folks, I guarantee you, I've been in politics long enough to know that if President of the United States went out and said, Russia is attacking our system and they're trying to do this and we're going to do this and this, everybody in America would have screamed, this is a cabal for Hillary. They're trying to scare the hell out of everyone. They want to ramrod the election, and you would have heard of retaliation. So we knew we couldn't do that. So what did we do? Well, President Obama commissioned the Director of National Intelligence and the Director of the CIA, because they are our intel community. They are apolitical. They are not controlled by politics, and they won't adhere to any politics. Everybody knows that. So they were tasked to come up with the message that went out to America. They went out, they delivered the message to America, told everybody this is happening. We then went to China, met with Putin. President Obama had a one-on-one with Putin, and I know what he said to him. And there's a photograph capturing Putin's expression while Obama's talking to him, which is pretty clear to everybody what's going on. And the message was, you know, this has to stop, and if it doesn't stop, you're going to suffer the most serious consequences that there are. And we contemplated in the Situation Room in the ensuing months, I mean, really serious stuff on a scale that went up and down. And we settled on a group of things: expulsing people, shutting down facilities, throwing their people out of the country, raising sanctions against the closest oligarchs around him, things that mattered. And you know, we were very clear about the need to do this. But nobody really understood the full measure of the invasion of Facebook and the social media platforms and other things, frankly, until even later.
Until more recently.
Until even later.
Do you wish now, if you could go back, that you had done more?
But one last thing. No, but one last thing. From the moment Obama had that confrontation with Putin in China, our measure is that nothing new took place. What did take place was the continued WikiLeaks, which had already been dumped.
Right.
And WikiLeaks continued to have some release because it was in the hands of WikiLeaks,
Right.
not the Russians directly. But that's the most direct answer I can give you about it. And obviously, it's a serious problem now. By the way, folks, so we expand this just a little bit, if I can,
Yeah.
Evan. What should matter to everybody in our country right now, and we've got to get away from the partisanship. It's hard to do because of the decisions being made and the tweeting and all the assaults that take place constantly. But the fact is that the opportunity cost of this administration right now is unfathomable, gigantic. So you look at our leadership in Asia. Even if you had a difference, I have some differences with the TPP. I think our whole trade relationship needs to be recalculated and redone. But we had 12 nations coming together to write our rules, US rules, the American way of approaching the marketplace, into effect for 12 nations in Asia. And when the president came in, he just pulled out of it. He didn't try to fix it. He could have had an easy fix. He could have gone in as the world's greatest negotiator and said, let's cross the T here, let's dot the I here.
Mend it, not end it.
Put in
right?
a little thing,
Yep.
Mend it, don't end it, and come back and said, look what I did. I'm the best negotiator, I just put it all together. But it's gone. The result is the 11 countries went ahead and wrote out all the things that we put in there that would have benefited American business, and they've now proceeded as 11 countries to effect it on their own. We've walked away from leadership in the region where we invested hugely. China is currently spending $1 trillion a year to build the One Belt, One Road project. It touches 70 countries. They built railroads, trains that go 300 miles an hour. I've ridden on it. The water doesn't even move like that right now. It's stunning what they're doing. They're investing $500 billion in building research labs and centers in all the key countries that hit the One Belt, One Road. You know, folks, they're building ports in Myanmar, in Sri Lanka, in Djibouti, about 6 ports through the Indian Ocean. And they're moving. We're not. We've stepped back. And our future, 95% of the world's customers live in other countries. You can't just trade with yourself and be strong and be a world leader. And what President Xi is doing now, and what President Putin are doing now, is greatly pushing the new narrative that the United States is in decline, that the liberal order of the West is in decline, and you have to pay attention to China and Russia in order to make, and it's working in some places. So look, I want America first,
right.
But you don't sell it the way it's being sold. You do it by engaging with other countries. We stopped Ebola in its tracks when they promised that 1 million people were going to die in the next 4 months. We didn't let that happen because we engaged.
Right.
We're on the brink of the first generation of children being born AIDS-free in Africa. Why? Because of PEPFAR, because of our efforts to raise the profile and change it.
You made a point in this book, I think, aligned with what you just said about the price of not engaging, that the world doesn't worry when America leads. The world worries when America doesn't lead. That there is a cost, you write in this book, to us making the decision, conscious decision, to withdraw from that leadership role.
But Evan, I think that, I mean, one of the things I had reinforced in me as secretary, and I'm so proud of our country for it, is that we really are indispensable. Things don't happen often unless we help organize it. An example is refugees. We galvanized the global community to come to New York, raise money for the refugee situation that was hitting Europe with Syria and Libya and the Horn of Africa. And we put together more money than's ever been raised to deal with refugees. Not enough. It's not the solution to the refugee problem because you don't want to keep paying just to put people in a camp. You know, the average life of a refugee in a camp is 17 years. So, I mean, we got to end these conflicts more. And we are the best positioned nation in the world to help do that.
A couple more before we go to audience questions. Is Kim crazy? And are we crazy to believe that we can make a deal with North Korea? The president says we should talk to North Korea. Once upon a time, when there was discussion from a different administration about talking to people like Kim and countries like North Korea, there was concern on the other side about why we were doing that. Now
Sure.
the position is, no, we should talk to everybody.
Well, nobody...
I just wonder if is it productive for us to be doing it? Is this going anywhere? Is he right that we should talk?
Well, in principle, he is right, and I am for talking. And I was somebody who practiced that as the art of diplomacy. I believe in engaging, but not futile engagement, not unthought out engagement, not engagement for the sake of engagement.
Right.
Engagement with a purpose and with a defined strategy for getting to where you want to go. What I object to and what the president did in Singapore was to have this glitzy big summit where he flies over, meets Kim Jong-un, requires Kim Jong-un not to do anything at all for it, and they have no communique. They come out of there with no definition of denuclearization, with no understanding of how we're going to ascertain where the weapons are, how many they have, how they will begin to strip them, what kind of verification will we have, et cetera. Now, in fairness, it's starting. But I would have, I would have absolutely, I don't think President Obama would have allowed me or he would have ever gone to a meeting like that without a clarity as to what was going to come out of it.
Yeah.
So now they're trying to do a redux.
Right, second time.
I'm all for it, providing they make up for what they didn't do the first time and try to get some definition to it. It's far better to be doing what President Trump is doing than to be doing what he was doing.
Right.
And you know, I mean, one of the great lessons I learned in Vietnam, and it's another lesson that I saw reinforced by our very bad decision to go into Iraq, is you owe it to young men and women, American men and women, before you send them into harm's way, you exhaust all avenues of diplomacy.
And that means
that's got to really govern it. So I'm for it.
Yeah. My last question to you. When you were first on the tour with this book, some smart aleck said to you, are you thinking about running for president again? You may regret having not said no, but you didn't say no.
Well, some smart aleck said in return, I'm not ruling anything out, but I'm not ruling anything in.
Yes, but you know Secretary Kerry, because you didn't just fall off a truck, that when you say something like that, everybody goes, oh my God, John Kerry's thinking about
Look, here's the deal.
Yeah.
I don't believe in the false posturing of politics. I don't believe in lying.
Yeah.
I believe you say what's real. What I have said everywhere I've gone, I mean. We have the greatest course correction moment we've had in years available to us in about 40 days. No one should be talking about 2020. Everyone should be focused on 2018. Right. That's the deal.
I hear you and I believe you and I know you mean that, but I'll note you didn't just come back to me and say, yeah, I'm not running for president. Just say the word, I'm not running.
I'm not.
You're not running?
I'm not running. Why, as I sit here now, no, I'm not running.
Okay.
And I'm not thinking about it right now.
I just want to get clarity because I'm giving you a mulligan, basically,
I have too much work to do, guys. I'm trying to negotiate a ceasefire between Jeff Sessions and the president.
Are you? Now that is some first-class colluding right there. That's actually good.
If I fail at that, I'm going to try Nicki Minaj and Cardi B. See if I can really.
Oh my God!
See what I can.
John Kerry just dropped a Cardi B reference. Everybody tweet that. That's pretty good. All right, we're going to invite my colleague, the Texas Tribune's magnificent community reporter, Alex Samuels, to join us up here on stage. Give Alex a big hand, please. Alex, Secretary Kerry, Alex. Alex, you've got questions from the audience that people have tweeted at us or texted to us, so why don't you go ahead and curate those. We're going to put, I think, up on the screen the instructions. If you've not had the opportunity to ask, we'd like to invite you to ask a question as well. So, go ahead.
Sure. Our first question here is from Ryan McGurk from Long Beach, California. He says, Mr. Secretary, what do you think will be the most pressing issue, foreign policy-wise, for the United States over the next 3 to 5 years?
The next 3 to 5 years, most pressing issue.
Well, there's no one single pressing issue, unfortunately, because of where we are. Korea obviously remains a critical issue. Russia and China together are a critical issue in terms of geostrategic efforts. Climate change is monumentally important. I've been working on that issue since 1988. Al Gore and I and Tim Wirth, a group of us in the Senate, We're there when we first heard from Jim Hansen that it's happening, and believe me, folks, having negotiated the Paris Agreement, I will tell you bluntly, we came out of Paris knowing we were not holding the temperature warming to the level we need to, but we were betting on the future of the marketplace to come up with the battery storage, with the solar, with the alternatives, and drive the market to move in that direction. What's happened by pulling out, we've left governors and mayors on their own. Luckily, 38 states in the United States have renewable portfolio laws. So 80% of America lives in those 38 states, and they're committed to continue to try to implement Paris. And so I can tell you with great assurance that while Donald Trump pulled out of the agreement, the American people are still in this agreement, and we're going to try to meet it. But wait, because that's the good side. The downside is this. Just meeting Paris doesn't get us there, folks. We're heading to about 4 degrees in this century. And already you see what's happening at 1.5 with the fires, the moisture, the floods, the storms, et cetera. So what makes me so impatient and angry about this is the solution is staring us in the face. The solution to climate change is energy policy. And if we would start implementing more rapidly the policies that are available to us, they're letting contracts in solar today in various parts of the world for 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Way cheaper than coal. And nobody does a real accounting for what the costs of coal are, because you don't do black lung counting, you don't do the greatest cause of children going to a hospital in America in the summer, which is environmentally induced asthma. $55 billion a year we spend on that. That's not put into the cost. The cost of transportation, the cost of spillage, the cost of the coal dust going into our lakes and rivers. Come on. You put that cost together, it doesn't even come close to what alternative energy is. So this is part of what I'm saying about creating voting issues. We got to vote on that issue. And the final issue, the fifth issue, about 5 big ones. There are 2 billion kids between the age of 15 and 24. And this is what being Secretary of State does for you. It really immerses you and opens your eyes to this. There are 1.8 billion kids 15 years old or younger. About 350 million of them are not going to go to school anywhere. And a foreign minister in a northern African country, he and I went out to dinner, and he said to me, I said, how do you manage your minority population? Are you scared about it? And he looked at me and he said, we're terrified, because the extremists grab these kids when they're 12 and 13 and living in poverty, and they pay them a stipend, and they take them away from their families, and they indoctrinate them. And then those kids, 6 months later, don't need a stipend, and they go out, and they become the recruiters. And the most telling phrase he said to me was, John, they have a 35-year plan. We don't even have a 5-year plan. That's what I believe leadership should be doing, folks. The way you're going to make America safe, remember that old World War I song, over there, over there? There's no over there anymore. All these impoverished people have cell phones, smartphones. They know what the world has, which means they know what they don't have. And it's a terrible recipe for more extremism, ISIS, some Al-Qaeda, someone. We have to send better messages to the world if we're going to make ourselves really safe and strong. And those 5 issues are the biggest ones I can think of.
Great. Alex, what else you got?
Our next question here is from Rachel. She asks, who is the most promising Democratic 2020 contender right now?
Right. Having said that you don't want to talk about 2020.
Yeah. We're not doing that question.
You're not going to do it? Well, look, I'm gonna push you respectfully, Mr.
No,
Secretary.
I'm not doing it because
Why?
because I don't want to talk about 2020.
You've got 2 people from Massachusetts. You've got 2 from Massachusetts who are talking about running. You don't want to talk about anybody or anything.
No, because I'm not going to talk about it, because tomorrow there'll be a story about John Kerry saying something about 2020, and that doesn't help us.
Well, we hope.
Not doing it.
Right.
Now, that may be great.
Right.
That may be great for TribFest. But
it is great for
TribFest.
That's all we care about. Right. Well, let me actually take the baton on that and ask a different question. You just had an interesting election in Boston where Ayanna Pressley beat an establishment incumbent Democrat in a congressional race in a primary, on the heels of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York defeating an establishment incumbent Democrat in a primary. We talk a lot about the civil war in the Republican Party, the divide in the Republican Party. There's a divide in your party right now, and the progressive wing of the party is going toe-to-toe with the establishment wing of the party, if you believe that AB. Where do you come down on that? Are you of a mind that the Democratic Party has to move forward with a different cast of characters in the lead? Or do you think your party, whether it's about 2018 or 2020, is pretty good where it is right now?
No, it's not where it needs to be right now, that's for sure. And I've said that many times over the last years. But I don't buy in to the automatic simplicity of label here, label there, put them in here, there. That's not the way it should work.
Yeah.
I refuse to be playing that game. I believe that the Democratic Party, writ large, already, right now, has a far better vision for what we need to do in this country to meet the needs of our nation. I'll give you a simple example. We are living in a country today where 51% of all of America's income goes to 1% of America. That is an unsustainable political equation by anybody's standard.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to,
right.
So the agenda is domestic. The health care, obviously, we can't be cutting people off with pre-existing conditions. We need to fully implement health care for every American. We have to find, I think there's a way to do it. I think I offered a lot back actually in 2004, which moved in that direction in a sensible, market-based way that could work. So there are all kinds of ways of doing it.
But you know, the push on the, you mentioned the fact that 54% of the wealth is in the hands of so few people. This is exactly the issue that the progressive wing of your party is pushing against the establishment.
Yeah, but no,
They're
it's
saying
not.
that the establishment Democrats are not doing enough to rectify that.
No, I don't think that's the way it's working. I think the establishment Democrats realize, and I think this will be a generally accepted principle of the party, and it should be, and it has been historically.
Yeah.
Look, we tried to do tax reform previously, and our vision of tax reform is very different from the other party. I mean, how many of you have your own page in the tax code? Anybody here? Well, I'll tell you what, they're this high a stack of books with pages, and most of them go to big corporations, to people with the power to get their own page. And there are entities and people with their own pages. That's what Americans object to. So I think there's a way to talk to, we can unite around all of these issues. I don't think we should get into an automatic demarcation of terms of labels of left, right, center right now. I think there are uniting issues, frankly.
Okay, Alex.
Sean from Twitter asks, how can the U.S. overcome its plague of gun violence?
Gun violence. How can the U.S. overcome its plague of gun violence? This is an easy one, not controversial at all.
There are so many things that we can do with respect to that. I am a gun owner. I am a hunter.
You believe in the Second Amendment?
All my life. I believe in the Second Amendment.
You know, Justice John Paul
fact,
Stevens wrote an op-ed in the Times calling for the overturning of the Second Amendment not long ago. You don't agree with that?
No. What I agree with is having sensible, common sense measures that begin to deal with it. And the way you deal with it is different in different places. Look at Chicago. I mean, that's gang warfare. That's a problem of kids who have no opportunity. It's a problem of families that have been torn apart, and nobody's paying attention to how you rebuild a future for those kids. I started a program called Youth Build. I don't know how many of you know about it. But in 1992 at the Democratic Convention, I went up to Harlem and I visited this program where young kids were rebuilding brownstones in Harlem, which unions were donating the labor to teach those kids how to rebuild the building. And every one of those kids came out of a court diversion program. I used to be a prosecutor. I know what's going on in that system. Or they came out of jail itself or off the street directly. Yeah. And we rebuilt. I saw this program. I heard one kid said to me, Senator, nobody in my life has ever told me, I've never heard the words, I love you. 17, 18 years old. So these kids were rebuilding their lives, and I can show you now tens of thousands of them, because I took that program. I went back to Washington. I was chairman of a subcommittee. I got them to put that into the subcommittee. We put it into HUD. We paid it and funded it, and now it's all over the nation. We have a youth build program, but not enough. It's always not enough. So we don't do enough for the kids. We don't do enough for the structure. We don't do enough to marry community policing with the community, and they've gotten away from that. I mean, I can tell you, and we need to take assault weapons off the streets of America. You don't sell assault weapons.
You know, in a state like Texas, In a state like Texas, Mr. Secretary, you talk about taking assault weapons off the street, you talk about increased background checks, you talk about high-capacity magazines,
I know what happens.
And they say to you, you want to take our guns.
No, I know exactly what the fight is, but you know what? You have to stand up to it. I've used those assault weapons in a country where we fought a war.
Right.
I know what they're for. I have never contemplated going out to shoot a woodchuck or a deer with an AK-47. You just don't do it.
Right.
And I think we can put safeguards in place. I've never heard anybody in Washington, so help me God, I have never heard a discussion in any committee by any senator, congressman saying, we have to take away the Second Amendment. It's never been a discussion.
Yeah.
So we got to get America to be invested enough in our own future and in our own capacity to govern and make promises we keep to bring people on board. And I know it's difficult, but we can do it. And you got to stick by your guns on that.
No pun intended, I'm sure. Alex.
Zoe Long asks, what advice do you have for current college students who want to have careers in government?
College students who want to have careers in government. We're finally back to a place where people are activated and want to be in government again. So what do you say to those folks?
My advice is go do it.
Go do it.
I mean, look, my advice is this. There is no office in public life that wouldn't welcome you as a volunteer if you can afford to be a volunteer, and that's always a harder piece of it. But there are many of them where they offer internships, they offer stipends, they have fellowships, whatever. You can find a way to hopefully work for somebody in government. Part of what we have to, I happen to believe that everybody ought to try to serve their country in some way. So if you don't go into the military, one of the things I'd like to see us do is pay off college loans by having people work within communities or in the public sector and make things happen. And I think you could take a year. And you know, I've talked about this for years and years. Many countries have mandatory service in the military. We should have, you know, the notion should be much stronger. And back in President Kennedy's time, of the Peace Corps started, people were imbued by this notion you can really make the difference. You can. So bottom line, folks, I don't think there's anything nobler. I think everybody ought to try to serve their country at some point, in some office, in some way. Doesn't mean you have to run for office, but you can work in your local community, you can work in city government, in county government, you can work in statewide, and yes, you can work in the federal government. And we won't make our democracy what we want it to be and what it ought to be unless you folks come out of college and come into the system.
Right.
Got to work.
Alex.
Someone from San Antonio asks, if you were an advisor for Beto O'Rourke, what would you tell him to do in the final 40 days to beat the current incumbent Texas senator?
All right, I will remove my ban on talking about Beto O'Rourke for the evening for this one question. You've called him out. You're clearly aware of his campaign.
I'm very aware. I admire what he's been doing. Yeah. Obviously, I think he's terrific, and he's done a great job. I don't think he needs advice from me. I think he's doing a great job.
You understand that you know. So let's stipulate. We'll have him on Saturday night. I just think
he needs to keep being Beto O'Rourke. Right. Don't let them deter him, and don't let the other guy swamp him with a bevy of absolutely false and misleading ads, which is what they do in the last days of the campaign. Witness what happened with me.
We will have him on Saturday night in what is, in essence, this chair. Different location, but basically in this chair. And, you know, what we're going to talk about is what happens between now and Election Day. He is, I think it is generally agreed, the most charismatic, the most articulate, and the most empathetic Democrat to run statewide since Ann Richards in Texas for high office. But it may very well not be enough. It may be that those things are true and he loses. And so the question is, if you are a Democrat with talent and promise and a vision, and you are running in a state like this one where the turnout is low, how do you change that calculation? What do you do?
I was just thinking what you said about Ann Richards. I mean, in Texas, women have paved the way, Barbara Jordan and Ann Richards for Beto. And
Barbara Jordan and Ann Richards have paved the way for Beto O'Rourke. How is that?
How is that?
How is that?
Their voices were so clear. They didn't mince words. They told it the way it is.
Yeah.
And I think people appreciated their candor.
Yeah.
I think people appreciated their authenticity, and I think that's one of the things people really appreciate about Beto.
You believe the national political environment redounds to the benefit of Democrats all over this country this time, that's not overhyped?
No, not everywhere. Obviously, there are still some very tough places.
Yeah.
And we're not going to see them turn quickly. But this state has a great Democratic history. This state has a great, I think, individual. I mean, this state is what state can you think of that values independence more than the state of Texas? Yeah. You guys have your own grid, right?
How's that working out for us is the question. You know, the thing is, Mr. Secretary, there are productive, successful grown-ups in this state who were not alive the last time a general election at that level was competitive in this state. I mean, that's the thing. You're pushing against recent history here. To consider any race to be competitive is news.
Well, I'll tell you, my great friend, who's been involved with my political life for a long period of time, is here. He's the former lieutenant governor of the state of Texas, Ben Barnes, and he told me he thinks that this can happen in Texas.
Well, it could happen. All right. Let's take one more question for Secretary Kerry before we all head off into the night and have some fun. How about that? Alex.
Someone on Twitter asks, sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I heard the word fun. I said, that's the best thing I've heard tonight.
Right, yes. Yes, the last hour and 15 minutes were work. Now let's actually have some fun. Go ahead.
What do you think of the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings and the impact that it may have on our country?
What do you think of the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings and the impact it'll have on the country? Well, this will be short, I'm sure. So what is your read of what happened today?
Well, my quick read of what happened today, I didn't see it all, but I saw a fair amount of it, both flying out here and in between things, and I listened to it in the car. But I missed some fiery exchanges from what I understand. As I said at the very beginning, spontaneously, unasked, I was really sad for an institution that I spent a long time in. The process just wasn't organized and didn't work right, and that's for both. I think it's a shame that he had his family had to go through this public thing without the Senate doing its work ahead of time, and it's a tragedy that she got dragged into it in the way that she did by a leak, without the process having been done in a collegiate, bipartisan way. And one of the signal things that stands out at me was what happened is a product of the dysfunctionality of everything else in Washington, and it's going to go a long way towards reinforcing in everybody a sense of disdain, if not outright scorn, for the inability of these folks to do what people sent them to Washington to do.
There's going to be an outcome to this, Mr. Secretary.
I think it's going to be serious.
But you know, whoever...
But come back to the last thing. Right. But even as I say that, folks, when so many men are standing up without having heard all the witnesses and automatically discounting and standing up and saying, you know, we're going to go right ahead with this. We're going to vote. We're going to vote tomorrow. We're going to vote the next day. By God, we're going to have this nomination in place. And then they say, well, we don't have the facts. We can't corroborate anybody who was there. Well, there was somebody there, and you're not willing to talk to him. This is utterly insulting to everybody's intelligence, and I think it's going to have real implications.
Alex Samuels, you are a great sport and a great contributor to this exercise. Thank you very much for doing what you did. Thank you. Mr. Secretary, we are, of course, so happy that we've had you here with us tonight. We wish you good success on your book. Thank you for your service to the country, and thank you for being part of the Tribune Festival. We appreciate it. Thank you all very much. Give John Kerry a big hand.
Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you, sir. I enjoyed it.
That was fun. That was fun. A lot of fun.
Thank you for spending time with us.
There was one passage in there I thought we might have read.